I'm Dennis Fabizak. I'm the director of the East Hampton Library. I'm thrilled to welcome you to the final Twomey Series 2015 program. We think today is going to be a really incredible program. It's also our annual Twomey Local History Lecture. Today we have Bruce Collins. Bruce is an amazing person. I think, and I say this in the nicest way possible, he's what I consider East Hampton's version of Forrest Gump. He's lived a long life, and he's been he has lived a long life and been fortunate to be present and involved in many important things, and he's got this amazing memory that he's able to retain in vivid detail what happened and explain it to us today. And every day that I sit with him and talk about things that happened, I'm educated beyond anything I've ever experienced. So Bruce Collins has been involved in a lot of things. He was born in 1930, grew up in East Hampton. In searching the 50 years that we have of the East Hampton Star online, you'll find that he was a Boy Scout. You'll find that he did track and field. He actually did pole vault before there were mats, and there's a photo in the Star in 1947 when he won and beat somebody, and he jumped 8.5 feet with no mat, with a wooden post. He was a tough guy when he was 16 years old. Bruce has also been a town board member, highway superintendent, town supervisor, president of the bank. One of the important things he did in East Hampton was chair the 350th celebration. As part of that, he helped to raise a lot of money, which eventually made it into the Long Island collection, and we'll talk a little bit about what we did with that stuff. Bruce has been president of the library board. He chaired the the construction committee for the building of this room and the children's space above us. And without him, we would not have ended up with what we have today. I mean, his knowledge and guidance is unrivaled, and we are fortunate to have him. Do you have anything else you want to add?
No.
No. Yes, you do. All right. So let me jump into this. As I said, when Bruce chaired the 350th for East Hampton, Bruce and some library board members, including Tom Twomey, got together and suggested that if there were any proceeds left over, that a great place for them to go would be the East Hampton Library for Long Island history material. I think at the time people didn't think too much would come out of that, but once everybody that had to agree to that did, a massive amount of fundraising was done, and close to $250,000 in profits remained at the end of the series and generated this incredible account at the library, which we have added to over the years. And we use it mainly for two things. The first is to help preserve documents. We've purchased 2 really expensive scanners, which are letting us put a lot of things online so that they can be used by people around the world. And we go to auctions to buy things that we feel should remain in East Hampton. In the past year, we had a great fortune to participate in an auction in New Hampshire. I actually bid by telephone, and it was for 6 whaling logs and some peripheral materials. One of them was this Panabone scrimshaw that we're showing on the screen here. The original is 8 inches by 12 inches, and it's actually a slice of a whale's jawbone that was made into a canvas. It's about a 1/2 inch thick, and one of the whalers carved it, showing a whaling scene. And if to our great fortune, it ended up in this auction. We don't typically bid on art-type material, but we do bid on whaling logs, and we won the auction. After the material was sent to us, the auction house informed us that this piece was actually worth more than everything we bought combined. And some dealers have contacted us because none of them have seen a scrimshaw of this detail and this size. And it's really an amazing picture. And since today we're talking about fishing, I thought it would be appropriate to show you, and maybe Bruce can just explain a little bit about what's going on in this scene.
Well, number one, most of the scrimshaw that you've probably seen heretofore has been scrimshawed teeth of whales and what have you, small stuff. But this was a very, very unusual piece of work, and certainly the biggest piece of scrimshaw that I've ever seen. And it depicts a whale chase with the whale ship in the background. And let's see, 1, 2, 3 boats after the whale. One of the boats, the one in the foreground, has fastened to the whale. The one immediately over the whale's back, the harpooner is about to strike the whale again. And then you have a third boat coming up. And the harpooning of the whale didn't kill the whale. The whale would pull the boat along until it tired out. And once it was tired, the boats would again pull themselves overhand on the line up to the whale. Those lines were really long. I don't know how long, but a long lines up to the whale. And when they got up to the whale the second time, normally the boat with the captain in it, the captain would take what's called a lance, and he would strike the whale with a lance, drive it into his lungs or heart, and that is what actually killed the whale. Once the whale was dead, they would get it up alongside of the steamer, steamer. You'll find out why I said that later. Up alongside of the boat, the whale boat, and they would start to flens it with long knives and flensing knives, and they would cut the blubber off of the whale, and they would have blocks and falls attached to it, and they'd pull on the blubber, and it would roll the whale as they flensed it, and they would take all the blubber off. The boat had a brick oven or a brick fireplace on it with great big cast iron kettles, and they called it a try-works. And the blubber was put in the try-works and cooked, and the oil rendered from the blubber and put in cask or barrels and stored below in the ship. And lots of times a lot of the bone was saved. I'm not quite sure what they did with all the bone, but some of the bone was saved. And that was about it, and they'd continue on with the voyage. Some of these voyages lasted for up to 4 years. And of course there were some that never came back. But that's about it. That's about what's depicted there in the picture. And hopefully they got that whale.
Yep. So this actual piece is in our collection. You know, we're happy to show it to anybody who comes in to look. We are renovating some display cases in the lobby, and this will be one of the things that is in the first display that we run. One of the things that we don't own yet in the Long Island collection is this map. This is from 1690. It's called the Old English Empire. The New York Public Library owns it, and we were able to purchase a copy from them. It's an important map because it's the oldest known depiction of a whaling scene off of Long Island. And if you see Long Island there, I'll zoom in to that picture so we can see closer. This is showing Indians in canoes hunting a whale. And to me, it's amazing how similar it is to the scrimshaw, which the scrimshaw dates between 1840 and 1850. So we're looking at about 150 years later Now seeing settlers, fishing for whale the same exact way that the Indians did.
When the settlers arrived here, the Indians were at that time already whaling. Lord knows how many years before the settlers got here that they started to whale, but they whaled in the ocean, and there were a lot of whales at that time, and they also would take the whales that washed up, that died for whatever reasons and washed up on the beaches and things. It was very important to the Indians that they had those whales, and they are the ones who initially taught the settlers to whale. And initially, again, the settlers whaled off the beaches in whaleboats. You can see one in the Marine Museum in Amagansett. That's one of the Edwards boats, and that boat was launched from the beach, and they would go right off the beach here and chase whales down and harpoon them and tow them back to the beach and pull them up on the beach. And there was some try works in different places along the shore, and they would render the oil and what have you. And that went on for a long time, and finally it became noticeable that there was less and less whales being taken along the beach, so they decided that they would build ships and go offshore and go to where the whales were rather than have the whales come to them. And so that's what happened. And initially, some of the early settlers, one of them, one of the Skellinger family, one of the Skellingers from Springs, hired the Indians to enter in what he called a whale design, which was no more than a whaling business. And he hired the Indians to get the whales, and they would get the whales, and he would pay them, and also give them a portion of the whales for what they did. And that's the way it went for a long time. That's about it.
So as I mentioned, the big thing we go for in auctions are whaling logs, and we go after whaling logs for ships that originated from our area, mainly from Sag Harbor. This is the title page of the Josephine. Our collection has really grown. We now have logs that cover 67 individual whaling voyages, and they range from 1783 to 1865. So it's a huge section of history, and these are original documents. There aren't copies of them anywhere. We have started scanning them so you can read them online. They're available for researchers to come in and use, and there's really some amazing information in them. We also have crew manifests, which not only give you the name, they also give you the age, the physical description, where the local people lived. They're great for genealogy, and from my perspective, they may be the greatest genealogy resources we have for local people going back to that time period. Do you want to talk a little about the logs?
Well, this is, as you mentioned, this is the log. It's probably one of the nicest logs that we have. It's the of the whale ship Josephine, and she whaled all over the world. And one of the interesting things about this is there was a local man aboard the boat, a fellow by the name of William King, and he was killed on this trip, on this particular trip, and it's interesting because the incident is recorded in the Josephine's log, and it was these ships went way far afield, and the place he was killed was in a sound, well, more than a sound. It was a bay between Japan and Russia. And it's absolutely unpronounceable name. It's spelled Okhotsk. If anybody can let us know how that's pronounced, we'd appreciate it. I have a Japanese daughter-in-law, and she came from Nagoya. She's a very smart gal. She couldn't get it. So anyway, this particular log happened to be in the possession of my cousin Tom Collins from Springs and his wife Ann. And I had enlisted Tom to come on the board of directors of the on the committee of the Long Island collection, and he did, and decided that the library was the place for this log rather than stored away in their house someplace. So they donated it to the library. That's about it.
So we know the last whale killed in East Hampton was approximately 1905. There was a huge industry, and a lot of income generated here related to whaling.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about what happened with the industry at that point and how it changed to getting closer to the time where you were involved?
Well, I really don't know. The thing that really killed the whaling industry, of course, was the discovery of oil as we know it, because the oil from the whales at that time was predominantly used for lighting and that sort of thing in people's houses, and but when the discovery of oil came, why that kind of disappeared, and people changed to the use of kerosene and eventually, way on later, fuel oil. Sag Harbor was a huge port. It was a port of entry. It was a bigger port than the city of New York. We had the first custom house. I'm 85. We had the first custom house, and the New York Sag Harbor was this. They had cooperages, and they had rope walks where the rope was manufactured for the ships, and there was a lot of activity up there, and just a great. But it was really the oil, as we know it, discovered in Pennsylvania, that put the kibosh on the whaling industry. So
I know we're going to talk a lot about fishing. The Star a few weeks ago ran this photo, and you were very interested in it for part of our talk. Why don't you explain what's going on there, and then we'll jump to the next slide that you provided.
Well, it doesn't look like there's much going on there, but there really is. We're going to talk later on about Promised Land. Everybody's heard of Promised Land, but nobody knows anything about Promised Land because it's gone. It used to be a postal address, believe it or not. And this is part of it, but this part that you're looking at here is the Edwards Brothers dock. This is a basin near Edwards Brothers Dock. That's part of the Promised Land factory over there to the right. In between these buildings here, that pile of white stuff in the back, they're oyster shells. Now, that's a small pile of oyster shells. One of the great tragedies here in the North Fork and the South Fork here also had at one time a huge oyster industry. When I was a child and 5, 6, 7 years old, the family would go over to South Hole to visit an old lady that lived right by the South Hole Cemetery by the name of Mrs. Glover. And at that time, the oyster industry was in full swing in Greenport. It was a huge industry. And there were piles of oyster shells there as big as 2-story houses. And that's an oyster boat over on the right-hand side. These other boats are trawlers. I don't know which ones. But this picture was put in the Star here only a few weeks ago. It was accompanied an article by Ed Sherrill. And it was very apropos to what I wanted to bring up because we're going to be talking about an industry that disappeared, and that's the Promised Land Fish Factory. And this is an industry that disappeared, and both of them were huge contributors to the economy of the east end of Long Island. Go ahead.
To illustrate how big it is, this is a map that you brought to the library.
Yes.
So why don't you talk a little bit about what it is, and we can zoom in closer to see more of the detail.
This is a very unusual map. Larry, you'll appreciate this. I say, Larry, you'd appreciate this. Because it's a survey of the oyster beds of Peconic and Gardiner's Bay. That's a survey out in the water, and how in the world it was ever done, I don't know. The survey was finished and produced in 1935, so the map is, 80 years old? And all the people that were involved in the oyster business leased from the state and the towns oyster lands, pieces of the bottom that they could plant oyster shells on and raise oysters. Two of the big players here was an outfit by the name of Raydell, and another one was by the name of Ellsworth. And you'll find the names all through the entire area, Raydell and Ellsworth, plus many, many others. One of the most interesting things about it is that if you look at the map up close there, notice the dotted line that goes across, and with a notation, district number 3. It's my understanding, and I think it's correct, that the income from the leasing of these various plots of underwater land went to the different school districts. It's one of the things that where they got their money to operate the schools at that time. You'll notice down in the bottom, right down there, there's a little notation that says Promised Land. And we're going to be talking about that later on. And over here to the left, a notation of Devon, so maybe you can get acclimated a little bit. And over to the other side, there's Gough Point and Hicks's Island. There was a number of local names there. E.J. Edwards down in the lower left-hand corner, and so right next to him was S.C. Grimshaw. That was Sam Grimshaw, and probably, well, undoubtedly, the picture that we saw just prior to this at the Edwards Brothers dock was oysters from the Edwards Brothers leases that they had around there. Way up in the upper right-hand side there's a pretty good-sized chunk that was Edwards and Wedmore. I don't know who Wedmore was, but anyway. And so they were staked out. There was stakes on all the corners of these different. It was a nightmare running a boat down through that territory, especially at night, because you thought you might get a tree trunk stuck up through the bottom. Can you go up a little bit, Dan? Just a little.
What I can do, I'll go back to this one, and I can zoom in if you want.
Okay, can you go to fireplace?
Where are we?
Up above where you were just now.
Yeah. Maybe I can. Well, I guess
Way over to the right.
here. Nope, can't.
Okay, it doesn't matter. I can talk. If you look to the right of this picture, you'll see Gardiner's Island up there, way over to the right.
Yeah.
Then you come this way to the left, and that's Fireplace Point there. Okay. Oysters from different areas are more prized than others, and you've all heard of blue points. Everybody's heard of blue point oysters. Just one of the reasons I wanted Dennis to raise up, there was a small section of the Blue Point. The Blue Points had a piece of land there underwater that they leased. But, of course, we all have oysters come from all over the place. I mean, you go up to Prince Edward Islands and you have the Malapex. You come down to Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, and you beautiful oysters from the North Cape come down into Massachusetts. Some of my favorite oysters come from Wellfleet, and you come down here where we are. Some of the finest oysters that were grown came from Fireplace, that point right there, and as I say, Blue Points had a piece of land right there alongside the Fireplace, and it was oysters from that particular stretch of water between Fireplace and Gardiner's Island where some of the finest oysters in the country came from. And of course, Chesapeake Bay has great oysters. You go down that way and you can oysters from Lynnhaven and Tangier and Pocomoke and Rappahannock and out on the ocean side, Chinkatigs, and down toward the Capes more, there's oysters that they call seasides that are very good. And all down the coast and around into the Gulf of Mexico, and you get over in Florida, Apalachicola oysters are renowned all over the world. And it's just a huge industry. But it was an industry that died out here, and it's a shame that it couldn't be resurrected in some ways. An oyster's a filter feeding mollusk. They strain between 2 to 3 gallons of water an hour, each one of them. When they spawn, they'll spawn as many as 50 million eggs at a time. And so it's just sad that something of that enormity was wiped out mainly by well, they always had what they called oyster drills, but they weren't bad, but there was a disease, I think it was called MSX. I don't know what it ever stood for. But it did a number on the oyster industry. And so that's where we are today. And I understand from reading in, I think it was last week's Star, or maybe it was this week's Star, that there's a group wanting to start up and start what they call oyster gardens. I wish they'd just say oyster beds. But anyway, we'll see how that goes. You can still find in small areas, you can still find some oysters if you go out and walk around. And any of the oysters that we find in these areas today are excellent. They're beautiful oysters.
So what year was that, Matt? 1935?
1935.
Yeah.
Yes.
Did you
It's the only one that I've ever seen in existence. I don't know where you'd find one.
Did you tell them where you got it?
Well, I can tell you where we got it. I was a town councilman. It was in 1960. And William Bain, who owned Rose Pharmacy, was a supervisor at the time. It was in the spring of the year, and the ground was all frozen up, and we had a freshet and a warm spell, and a pond developed over near where Peconic Beverage is today. The line or the conduit that came into the town hall, which is just east of there, ran from a ditch line there in back of Peconic Beverages, and there was a short pipe, and the water built up. The pond got way high, and water went into the conduit and ran across and came into the cellar of the town hall. We came to work in the morning, and the caretaker was there, and Bill Bain was there, and the whole bottom of the basement area of the town hall was flooded. There were hundreds and hundreds of documents and books, the old town records and surveys and what have you were covered with water and mud, and they were just loading them in the cars and throwing them out. I happened to see this map, and I had been fishing for a while then, and I asked Bill Bain, I said, are we going to get rid of that? And he said, yes. And he said, it's of no use. He said, it's old and nobody uses it anymore. And I said, can I have it? He said, yes. So I brought it home and cleaned it up and kept it.
So one of the other collections Bruce was able to acquire for the library was a big box of photos of Promised Land and Greenport. and it was from one of your neighbors. Why don't you talk about a little bit about who took the photos before we talk about what's in
I'd
them?
like to talk a little bit about Promised Land to start with.
Yep.
This is the Promised Land Fish Factory. Just to the right of that today is what they call the fish farm. Everybody know, familiar with the goats and stuff? And that fish farm was on property that belonged to the Edwards brothers from Amagansett. As a matter of fact, the Edwards brothers owned most of all of that beach that stretches down toward Devon. And in 1930, the two brothers, Gilbert and J. Howard Smith, who were building I'm going to call it an empire of fish factories up and down the Atlantic coast. They had wanted a factory somewheres in this area. And there was a factory just east of, you can't see it, but east of this factory, nowhere near as big as this. And it was owned by an outfit by the name of Hayes. A small factory, but they had 24 boats working for them. And but in 1930, Gilbert Smith had an opportunity to buy a smaller factory that was on this property here from an outfit by the name of a fellow by the name of Frank Morse. And so he bought that and started to develop it. The reason it's called Promised Land was because of the fish, the amount of fish and the quality of the fish that could be brought into this factory from as far away as Maine. And so the name was really stuck. It was named by many of the fishermen that came from down in Virginia, around Kilmarnock and Matthews County, and Motor Run and different places of that nature. And they call this area Promised Land because of just that, the quality of fish and the number that could be caught. And so the picture was taken by my next door neighbor, Charles Smith, who was a pilot, who was the executive pilot for Smith Meal. Smith Meal went by numerous names. There was Smith Meal and Atlantic Processing Company and Seacoast Fisheries and others, because they had different factories all up and down the East Coast as far as Beaufort, North Carolina. And then they had factories subsequently in the Gulf of Mexico, Moss Point, Mississippi, Sabine, Texas, Port Arthur, Texas. But Charlie became their corporate pilot. And he was also one of the first people that realized that you could see fish from the air. And subsequently, the setting of the boats and the catching of the fish was all directed by plane. So Charlie took this picture plus many others, and when I came to the library, I realized that here was this huge industry that we had in East Hampton, right here in Amagansett, and there was nothing in the library archives that had anything to do with Promised Land or the fish, It's the menhaden is the name of the fish. We locally call it bunkers, mammy shad, just different names, but locally it's known as bunkers. And when I'm talking to you later on, that's what we're going to talk about, bunkers. That's it.
All right. So for anybody that's curious, with Google Earth, we matched up today what Promised Land looks like.
Hang on. Subsequent to this, the factory closed in 1968. I came off the water for good in 1960, I think. And the factory closed. A lot of it had to do with the growth of the communities. And when that place was cooking, by the way, and the wind was to the eastward, you could easily have smelled it here. And it smelled like money to the local people. And it just drove the summer colony crazy. So anyway, the Smiths decided that it would be in their best interest to shut this plant up. And it was a huge producer of quality products, quality fish, and oil for the company. The property was sold to the state of New York, along with other property that they owned on the Nairpig Stretch. And the factory was taken down, and Dennis is going to show you what it looks like today and why you can't. There it is.
We'll jump back to the old slide. The thing most interesting to me is how Mother Nature has started to heal itself. If you look at this corner point down here, watch when we go back to the way when it was operating. Where the ships went in is now all filled in.
That was the Edwards Brothers boat basin there. The Edwards Brothers boat basin. And the Edwards Brothers, you see the road coming in there to the left into that basin? And just in the basin there's a 110-foot World War I subchaser. It's probably the Magdalene. And just ahead of it, you'll see a building there. You see that building? That was the Edwards Brothers. They owned that. And it was run as a concession, and all the crews on the boats and everything could come over there, and you can get Coca-Cola and cigarettes and cigars and boots and oilers, new waiters, whatever, anything that you needed to have to go fishing could be acquired there. And that building was managed by Charles Smith's father, the photographer's father, for many, many, many years. Okay, and so today you don't see that. Show them the next one. You see what's there now. You can see the tanks of the fish farm over there, and that building is one that was left over. And
the curved road at the top right corner is Cranberry Hole Road.
That's Cranberry Hole Road. There was a railroad spur that came down off of the main line of the Long Island Railroad down there because they had to ship the meal and stuff from the fish, and the oil that was produced from the fish went out of here by the hundreds of tank car loads. So,
okay, now for the fun stuff.
That's a menhaden. As I say, commonly known as a bunker here, and moss bunkers, and it's called by lots of different names. You'll notice his mouth is open. You'll also notice he doesn't have any teeth. These fish can get up to a length of 18 inches. They can weigh up to 4 pounds. But the average of them is just about half of that. A 2-pound fish is a big fish. And in the fall of the year, well, really not necessarily the fall of the year, all through the fishing season, some of the best fish come from up here and was taken into the Promised Land factory. The thing that Dennis was surprised at early on when we first started to talk about this is the fact that these fish are not caught offshore very far. They're caught close to the beach, very close to the beach. As a matter of fact, they're caught in harbors and bays and sounds. And well, a lot of fishing was done in the Providence River, both the east and west passage of the Providence River. We've caught fish right straight up off of the municipal pier at Providencetown. The fish swim in huge schools and with their mouths open, and they're plankton feeders. You can cast with a fly rod or a fishing rod, you can cast into a school of 1 million bunkers all day long and never catch one, unless you foul hook him. He's not going to bite. He's not going to bite your lure. And you would think they're food for swordfish and striped bass and bluefish and tuna fish, and every fish that swims feed on bunkers. When you're eating swordfish down at Gosman's, you're really eating bunkers. Don't tell Emmett I said that. So, and the fish are caught not in the hundreds of thousands or millions, but they're caught by the menhaden fleets in the billions. This is a picture of a bunker steamer. We'll show you other pictures of bunker steamers, but this is a picture of a relatively modern bunker steamer. There's one right there. Hold that picture. You'll notice there's 2 boats on the stern of that steamer. By the way, before we call them steamers, they're diesel-driven, but we call them steamers because the original boats were steamers. And it just goes on. And those purse boats are 41 feet long, to give you an idea of the nets. The net is a purse seine. It acts like a woman's purse. You have half of it in one. You have half of it in one purse boat, half of it in the other purse boat, and you go out and you get close enough to the school of fish, and you go around like that, and you come together, and you separate the line, and each boat takes half the net and starts to take it in. These pictures all, by the way, were taken about 60 years ago. The only thing that has changed dramatically is the manner in which the net is taken back after the fish were caught. You're going to see that they're all taken back by hand. And today, the net is taken back with a hydraulic block and a crane in each boat. When they were taken back by hand, there was anywhere from 12 to 15 men in each boat. Today, there's 5, maybe 7 at the most in each boat. The nets are anywheres, depending on where you're fishing, the nets are anywheres from 200 to 300 fathom. 200 to 300 fathom, 12 to 1,800 feet long, and 100 feet deep. And the boat, that's a steel hull. We had many wooden hulls. That's a steel hull. I can't tell which one it is. Setting light without any fish in, the boat draws 5 feet to the bow. Loaded, it draws 12 feet to the bow. And you look up to that pole there, up to the masthead. That's just not something to make the boat look good, but it's a necessary item toward catching bunkers. Because before the advent of the airplane spotting the fish, most of the fish were spotted by 3 men up in the masthead. You go up there. Anywhere from 65 to 85 feet above the water, in all kinds of weather. There would be the pilot and the mate, or the captain and the mate, and a fellow that we called a dry boat man or the striker. And when a school of fish was found, they would come down the rigging, the striker first, and he would get in a small boat and row out.
Why don't we,
Here we come.
we'll walk you through the process.
We'll talk.
Yeah, we're running a little late, so we should jump
Okay.
through this.
We're running late. You want to? That's one of the old steamers. I'll go quick.
Okay.
It's one of the old steamers. Besides fishing, they had other duties to perform on there. They had to coal that boat up, bring coal aboard the boat when they would get into the dock with wheelbarrows. The nets at that time were made out of cotton, and they had to salt the nets in the evening after every day's fishing. They had to salt the nets to keep them from rotting. Okay, but that boat was, there we are, that's Billy Lewis up in the pilot house already, Captain Jack Edwards going up. And there's Captain Jack, Billy Lewis, and Miff, Edward Moore, the dry boatman, is up there in the masthead. There they've seen a bunch of fish, Captain Jack on the left-hand side, Billy Lewis in the pointing there. And you'll notice the trap door is open and the striker has already come down. There they're going to make the set, and there's the captain and the mate coming down. From up there, looking toward the bow, that's what you see. This is looking down from the trap door down the ratlins, and we tell everybody that not to miss that first step because hard luck is sure to overtake you. This is one of the planes that Charlie Smith, my next door neighbor, flew this Bell helicopter, and we used it when we were close to home because it was slow getting out. And this is one of the super pipers, super cubs, that was used normally for spotting by one of the other. There was Charlie Smith, and there were 3 other pilots that. That's Edward Moore getting into the dry boat. He's going out to the set. And this is later when the planes, after the advent of the planes, the striker boatman no longer rowed out to the set. They would tow him out behind the purse boats, going out on the set. As the set had been made, there's the striker boat in the back of the school of fish. You can see the fish there. The purse boat's going around. That's the captain's boat. And you can see right in the middle of the boat there's a set of purse blocks there that the purse line was put in and winched up. And the striker boatman would direct the set, and he would be able to tell the captain and the mate was in the other boat, which way they were going, or if they were, he would really direct the set. Go ahead. There we can see how close we are to the beach fishing. You'll see the windmill there. That's on Windmill Lane, just off Further Lane, William Simon's place. And they're making a set around. Once the set had been made, the striker boat would row out to the center of the caulk line. There he is rowing out to the center of the caulk line, and he would pull some of those caulks up and lash them to the boat. And it was to add extra buoyancy to the net out there, because without it the fish could easily go over or sink the whole caulk line. And at times I've seen that the fish so heavy that they actually take the boat underwater, and he would have to swim for the purse boats. That's a pretty good set of fish. I don't have a picture of a blowout. And by the way, this is probably the only picture with the new aluminum boats with the crane in it. This set of fish must have been taken from the Tidelands. I'm sure it was. Once the set had been made, everybody went in the purse boats, with the exception of 5 men. The 2 engineers, the chief and the second engineer, and the 2 cooks, and the pilot, which was me. Once that had been done and the fish were caught, it was the pilot's job to bring the steamer up alongside of that set. Hopefully without hitting the net or anything and splitting it open and losing thousands of dollars. So that the net is brought up. The previous picture you saw, the cooks and engineers bringing the caulk line up on the side of the steamer, and that was made fast to the side of the steamer. The men would all pull the nets, as you see them doing there, and drying, what we call drying the fish up, so that we could get ready to pump them aboard the steamer. That's a pump. It's a 14-inch pump, and they're getting ready to put that in the net. On the end of the pump, right down where it's going in the water, there was a bronze cage, and it had a electrical wire going to it. And up above, you can't see it, but up further off the side of the boat, they'd throw a bronze square made out of about 2.5, maybe 3-inch bronze tubing. Also had a wire going to it, electrical wire. It was developed by a scientist from Germany, Dr. Konrad Kreutzer. And once that was in the water, you hit the button and set up an electrical current between both electrodes, and the fish would go crazy trying to get into the net, into the pump. I don't know how many gallons of water a minute the pump, but the pump would pump 12,500 fish a minute, or 100,000 fish every 8 minutes. This is a picture taken off of what was at that time the biggest bunker steamer in the entire fleet, one of the biggest boats in the country, the Tidelands, and was run by Captain Norman Edwards from Amagansett. And you can readily see the amount of fish that was going into the holes. That boat is one of them operated under new insurance laws that said that you could no longer deck load the boats. That's a deck loaded boat. That's the Shinnecock, the one I was on. You don't see the purse boats because I was out in the purse boats taking that picture. It was taken in Cape Cod Bay. That's North Truro over in the background over there. You can see the pile of fish up on the middle between the forward houses and the engine room, and the couple of men sitting on that pile of fish. 1,544,000. That's Captain Jack Edwards standing up in the wheelhouse. That once they got to the factory, they pulled up underneath one of the pumps that was on the dock, and fish were pumped out. That's a regular trawler that had been modified to do some purse seining, and there was some of those boats out of Point Judith, Rhode Island, that came over and sold their fish to Smith Meal. That flag is flying because that's the last day of the season, that particular season, and we were flying the flag because we were the high boat for the summer, 30 million fish. That's about it.
Yep.
Oh, in 1950, around the latter part of the 1950s, the government decided that on boats of certain tonnage, I forget whether it was 120 tons or 220 tons, there should be 2 licensed men forward and 2 licensed men aft, meaning there should be in the pilot house 2 licensed men, either a master or a mate or 2 mates or 2 masters or whatever, and aft in the engine room a chief engineer and a second engineer or 2 seconds or 2 chiefs, or as long as there were 2 licensed people. And you're licensed for areas in which you fish. As far as I knew, Captain Bo Payne, Kenneth Payne from Shelter Island, and Captain Norman Edwards from Amagansett had licenses that allowed them to fish not only here on the East Coast, but also the Gulf of Mexico. This is my license, and it calls for 750 tons. And it's for 50 miles offshore, far more miles offshore than you need to catch bunkers. And it's from Eastport, Maine to Port Isabel, Texas, and that takes in the Gulf of Mexico also. And you have to be able to prove to them you've been where you've been on those, when you're set for those licenses.
Since we're running a little short on time,
Yeah.
I think I'll move ahead back to the log Josephine, and then we'll take some questions. Okay.
Oh, okay.
Skip through. These are the wheelhouse, and all of these are in our collection now, and Bruce has given us cataloging information for them, so everybody knows what they are.
Why did you put that in there?
So let me just set the stage. This is the page where William King, the description of him getting killed appears, and I zoomed in a little just so we have the one passage from the log Josephine.
Okay, Dennis says we're running short on time, so we better conclude this. But I just want to talk very briefly about this particular page in the logbook of the ship Josephine, the whaleboat Josephine. William King had they pulled in the line to get up near the whale, and was coiling the line down in the line tub, and I guess he thought that they had most of the line in, and he stepped in the tub, and the whale wasn't quite dead yet, and the whale ran or sounded and wrapped the line around his leg, and he went overboard, and he was drowned. They later, the crews later retrieved the line, and luckily he was still caught in the line. They brought him aboard and buried him at sea. His name was William King. He was married to a gal in East Hampton by the name of Nancy Patty, was his wife's maiden name. And they had one child, also called William King. He had joined the Union forces. I believe he belonged to the 127th New York Volunteers of the Union Army. He died in Morris Island, South Carolina, at the age of 18. So Nancy Patty, she was left alone without anybody. But in due time, she remarried. She married a fellow by the name of Jonathan Payne, and from Barnes's Hole down in Springs. They had 5 kids, 5 children, all daughters, one of which was named Nancy after her mother. And in due time, Nancy got married, and she married a fellow by the name of William H. Collins. And the upshot of this whole thing is that had not William King been drowned, and had indeed came back safely to Nancy Patty, I wouldn't have had the pleasure of talking to you here today.
Ask some questions.
Do you know the original meaning of the word Hampton, Hampton? I've been told it means windmill. I've been told it means gathering. I'm not sure if it's British or Dutch.
I don't have the answer to that. I don't know. Of course, you realize that East Hampton was originally called Maidstone. East Hampton was originally Maidstone.
Bruce.
You might also not know that Greenport was originally called Sterling.
Bruce, first of all, I just want to say that this lecture is a national treasure, and so are you, and thank you so much for sharing this with us all. But I want to ask you, how were the Menhaden fish used? What were they used for?
Oh, okay.
And are they still caught today?
Originally, the Menhaden were used by the Indians, of course, to fertilize their fields, and they introduced that process to the settlers when they came over here. But the Menhaden, or the bunkers, is arguably the most valuable fish that swims. About 400 to 500 different products are made from Menhaden. Your lipstick may be. Margarine is made from the oil, not here in the United States, but in Europe and Canada. Margarine is used. The oil is beautiful. It looks like gin. when it's processed. Sherwin-Williams was a huge Rust-Oleum, paints of all kinds. They used it for tempering special steel. They used it in pharmaceuticals. There are certain pharmaceuticals that even today that bunker oil has been used for that have not been able to be synthesized. And there's just so many products. And what we call the stick, which was the gurry that was left over, was processed, reduced and processed and bought by like Purina for turkey pellets. The solids are used for cattle feed, for adding to the cattle feed and all sorts of stuff, and for fertilizer. There's just so many things that you use on a daily basis that is processed from Menhaden that you can't believe it.
I have a question about the business relationship between the Edwards brothers and Smith Meal. I know the Edwards brothers started out on their own before Smith Meal came to the area. But I've also heard that towards the end of it, in the 50s and 60s, that the Edwards brothers captains worked for Smith Meal. Were they?
Oh, yes. There were Captain Jack that I was with, Captain Joshua B. Edwards, Captain Norman Edwards, Dick Edwards, and Kenneth Edwards. Okay, they were three brothers and one cousin.
Children of Sam and Bert and the other.
Right, and the Menhaden season ran from about the 1st of June until the middle of October, when we take the boats down south and put them up for the winter. Then Norman and Ken and Dick, you saw the picture of one of the 110-footers there.
Yeah.
There were really three. There was the Robert E., which was Dick's boat, the Edith L. Hudgens, which was Norman's boat, and Ken had a smaller boat. He had a trawler called the Alwa, and they went fishing in the winter, but for food fish. They went offshore trawling for fluke and flounder and porgies and all that stuff.
Those were the 110-foot subchasers.
They were trawlers. They were trawlers that they used.
Mr. Collins, I was wondering, when Promised Lands left the area, where did they move to? Did they just disband and stop working the factory?
Oh, no.
Or did it move to another area on the coast? Or
No.
what happened?
No. In 1953, there were 35 factories working on the East Coast. A number of those factories belonged to Smith Meal. The next factory from here down was at Port Monmouth, New Jersey. And then there was some just inside Brigantine Light at Crab Island and what have you. And there was two factories. They had two factories at Lewes, Delaware, and then at Beaufort, North Carolina, and then down into the Gulf. And the Smith business was eventually called Seacoast Products, and it was eventually sold to Hanson Limited, which is a huge industrial complex from England. And one of the principals in that business was a David Clark, who lives here in Amagansett now, and is a grandson of J. Howard Smith, who was one of the founders. J. Howard Smith and Gilbert Smith were the two brothers that founded the whole Smith complex. And J. Howard Smith had children. Gilbert Smith didn't have any children. But so.
I understand that there was a settlement in the Northwest, on Northwest Harbor, years ago that was sort of competing for some of the whaling business. It's an area that's now known as the Grace Estate, and that they had some cooperages and some other buildings there.
Well, Northwest was a village unto itself many years ago before Sag Harbor. And the ships used to come into Northwest. And there was a school there and a church and, down near where I'd say the peach farm. I don't know whether you know where the peach farm is or not.
Yeah.
But anyway, there were docks and warehouses and what have you all along that shore there. And then when the whale ships, because they drew much more water than could get in there, the whale ships moved over to Sag Harbor. And eventually everything moved to Sag Harbor. There used to be a fish factory at Sag Harbor. There were fish factories at Shelter Island and all over the place.
Thank you.
When I go along the east edge of Nat Peak, and I know I'm probably saying that name wrong, there are remnants of bricks that extend maybe around 3/4 of the way to the inlet that's now closed. What was there that those bricks?
The Hayes Fish Factory.
Okay.
Among others, there were other factories all along there, and but a lot of those bricks came from the Hayes factory, and the remnants of the Hayes factory. One of the things that was still there, the last I knew, was a brick smokestack that was
Right.
on the point there. You familiar with that?
Yes, yes.
Well, the Hayes factory was there, and Promised Land was west of the Hayes factory.
Okay. One more question. The spelling of the name Accabonac on the map that you showed us, it is 1C. When I go to tide charts, it's 1C, but in the community, it's 2 C's.
It used to be, in the old days, it used to be spelled with an I also. ACCBONIC. So it's,
Take a pick.
Okay, thank you very much.